You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Way Home. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly. Today, we're joined by Tim Richter, President and CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. With the CAEH National Conference just around the corner, we're diving into the big themes shaping this year's gathering, from the momentum behind Build Canada Homes, new things that CAEH is rolling out, and to how communities across the country are mobilizing to end homelessness for good. Let's listen in. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us on the show today. I can't even imagine how possibly busy you are right now preparing for the CAEH conference. And Tim, for those who are listening and may not know, can you start by sharing what the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness is all about and how its mission has evolved over the past decade?
Oh yeah. So, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on. Good to see you again. It's been a while. The Canadian Alliance was set up in 2012. We are a national organization, and our mission is in the title there. Our mission is focused on ending homelessness. We do that a couple ways. We are engaged with communities around the country, helping them build coordinated homeless systems, helping them, do the tasks at a community level that it takes to end homelessness. We also provide training to frontline organizations, helping ensure that we have the skilled workforce that we need to end homelessness in Canada. And we also do a lot of policy advocacy. So you see us all the time. If you're in Ottawa and you're engaged in federal political matters, you'll see us there. We've been pretty heavily involved in federal housing policy because, after all, homelessness is a housing problem. So we work with communities, support them in that effort as well. So now we are working in just probably over 65 communities around the country.
Wow.
In different ways and up to our eyeballs in federal policy. And we've got this huge conference coming up 28th to 30th of October in Montreal.
Very exciting. So we're going to jump in more. Thank you for refreshing the listeners' understanding of your work. Could you start with our signature question and answer? What does home mean to you?
Oh, home is love to me. Home is a safe space where I get to be with my family.
And you mentioned the CAEH conference. This is always a highlight for the sector. I've been there many times and always walk away with new learnings, new partnerships. What are some of the key themes and priorities being lifted up this year?
So the 2025 National Conference on Ending Homelessness is taking place in Montreal this year, October 28th to 30th. We're expecting to welcome a record crowd of about 2,200 people. It's been growing every year since we put it together in 2013, first launched it. We have over 250 speakers from all over Canada and all over the world. We've got some terrific keynotes. We've got 100 plus concurrent sessions, plus a ton of networking events and other things. It's really getting huge. And when I think about our team keeps talking about why does it keep getting bigger every year? Why is there so many people? And I don't think it's us. Honestly, I think this is kind of like the annual meeting of the sector, right? And as you know well, our sector is going through some really challenging times, right? Homelessness has been surging in Canada, really since just before the pandemic. According to federal data that I've seen recently, since 2018, homelessness has more than doubled. According to federal point-in-time counts, unsheltered homelessness has gone up like 300%. And, that presents some real challenges for our sector. And I think people come, to be around their people, to know that they're not alone and to pick up some solutions to figure out what works. And so, this year we're really providing that space and also providing people with some tangible concrete things that they can take home. That's the other thing that I think is really a hallmark of our conference, is the size of the program and what's available to people. And people can come to the conference, pick up something there and take it home. And over 85% of people who come say, you know what, I got something at that conference I've taken home and put to work.
That is true. And we, like you said, I think it is an opportunity not just for learning, but to get together as a sector. Are there a couple can't miss sessions or plenaries that you're especially excited about?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there's a lot to choose from. There's some really cool stuff like artificial intelligence and homelessness response and coordinating levels of government to prevent and reduce homelessness and how to use data to accelerate reductions. But I'm actually really, really excited about some of our keynotes this year. Like we have Jesse Thistle again. I don't know if you were at our conference in Winnipeg. Jesse is hands down one of the best speakers I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them. We have Stephen Page from the Bare Naked Ladies, and I got a laugh at one of my colleagues who is, I'll just say, a lot younger than me. She said, "Oh, Stephen Page is coming. My dad is going to be so jealous." I was like, "Oh, I'm feeling a little old," but I'm really excited to see Stephen Page. But there's also Loretta Ross from the States. Loretta Ross is a civil rights leader and activist in the United States, and it's really apropos in these times when you have such conflict in our political discourse and such conflict. When we see that in the homeless services, you must see it as well. People talking about wanting to force people out of encampments and criminalization and using police, and the rhetoric around homelessness is becoming very, very divisive. And Loretta Ross has this really interesting approach about calling people in, as opposed to calling people out and othering people and leaning into that conflict, just kind of trying to call people in to understand what is behind some of that vitriol. So, and we're also, this year going to try a couple of different things. So one of our sessions is actually going to be a morning networking breakfast. Instead of having a plenary, we're going to have the federal minister of housing, Gregor Robertson, is going to come. We're going to do a fireside chat for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a networking opportunity for folks to sit around, meet their peers, and talk around different themes that they're interested in chatting about. So lots of really cool stuff.
That does sound really cool. For those listening, whether frontline leaders, policymakers, advocates, why should they make the effort to attend this year's conference?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things is, on a plain kind of nuts and bolts level, you have access at this conference to experts from all over the world. You have some of the smartest people in ending homelessness anywhere in Canada, doing some of the most groundbreaking work anywhere in the world here in one place. You will save yourself a ton of money on consultants and and hours and hours on Google, just walking the halls and going to some of these different sessions. The other thing that's great about this particular conference is everything's recorded. So there are 100 plus planner or 100 plus concurrent sessions. All of them will be recorded. So if you attend, you get access to those recordings. So it's like master class for homelessness.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's very cool.
Mhm.
And CAEH has such a unique role in convening and accelerating progress towards ending homelessness across the country. How do you see that role evolving as the sector faces both huge pressures and big opportunities ahead?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for us that we'll be leaning more into, there's a lot, but I think a couple of things that are really going to be important for us is you see how fast the world is changing around us, right? And how fast the homeless situation is changing. So, for example, I said the 300% increase in unsheltered homelessness. that was a pretty predictable outcome of the pandemic, and I think a lot of people knew it was coming. I think one of the things that the Alliance is challenging itself with now is to say, how do we respond more quickly to what's happening in the communities, right? How do we, when we can anticipate some of these changes, how do we make sure that we've got the support there for communities when they need it, not so much later, right? So how do we respond more quickly? How do we provide communities with the supports that they need? How do we lift the burden? How do we make life easier for communities and frontline workers? I mean, that's the thing. Everybody's running. I'm sure you feel this at Blue Door, right? You're running out of time. Like, how do you? It's just, and the complexity of the people you're seeing is getting more and more challenging, especially with toxic drug supply. So how do we, as an organization, make your life easier and respond more quickly to what you need? And how do we help you deal with some of these structural issues? Like Blue Door on its own would really have a hard time moving federal housing policy, but that's something we can do. And we can work with our network of partners and allies around the country, and mobilize a movement. And we've been successful, in moving billions of federal housing dollars into supportive housing, market rental housing, affordable housing, and changing that policy. So I think, I think now that's the big challenge, and that's what we're challenging ourselves with, trying to adapt.
Am I hearing a drum in the background?
No,
No.
I do. But you know what's funny? My son is a drummer, and oh no, there is a drum kit right there, but it's not me.
So let's talk about you did a perfect segue there.
Mhm,
Let's talk about the federal government's new initiative, Build Canada Homes. What would it
mhm,
take, from your perspective, for Build Canada Homes to meaningfully reduce homelessness? And what kind of national coordination would it take?
mhm. Well, I think the biggest lesson out of the national housing strategy is that the federal government needs to make sure its housing policy supports its homelessness objective, right? They've always treated reaching home as separate from their housing policy. And so the national housing strategy really didn't, with the exception of maybe the rapid housing initiative, really didn't alleviate any pressure on homelessness, because it didn't get housing more deeply affordable. So if Build Canada Homes is to make a material difference, and I'm hopeful that it can and it will, I think we need to first make sure that there's a clear definition of affordability that is tied to a person's income, so that no more than that a home was deemed affordable if you can pay it on 30% of your gross household income, right? CMHC, under the National Housing Strategy, had 5 different definitions of affordable, all geared to market, which is why we ended up with programs that didn't support people experiencing homelessness. I think that's going to be really key. I think we also got to, we've got to realize, if you're going to do anything about homelessness, you need deep affordability. And the federal government's housing policy is really clear. It's in the National Housing Strategy Act. It says we have to ensure the progressive realization of the right to housing. And under international law and Canadian law, that says you got to prioritize those in greatest need first, which means you need to have targets and timelines for the reduction and elimination of homelessness. And I think that'll be really important. And Build Canada Homes is going to be a big part of that, but that in itself won't won't be enough. And it was encouraging to see this supportive housing investment coming with the Prime Minister's announcement. $1 billion is really great. 13 billion overall is important, but it's a start. I think the coordination point you're getting to is also appreciating that the federal government alone, Build Canada Homes alone, is never going to solve the housing crisis, because there's never going to be enough federal money. And some of the biggest barriers is not just the money, but it's the coordination between the different levels of government, and the barriers, development charges, time it takes to permit a new building, that impacts people trying to do affordable housing and supportive housing as well. That is purview of the provinces. and the cities. So we've been lobbying for a new federal provincial agreement on housing that would embed in their provincial homelessness reduction targets and alignment between the feds and the provinces on how we're going to tackle homelessness, starting with unsheltered and chronic homelessness, but eventually focused on ending all homelessness.
Well, pretty intricate work. CAEH has been a global leader in the functional zero movement, and you're now building on this work with the launch of the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund. Can you tell us more about how this fund will support communities to accelerate homelessness reduction?
Well, what we're testing is effectively an approach to ending homelessness that is data-driven continuous improvement, right? And I think other efforts and other focuses have been on, you would build a plan, and you have a housing plan, you'd have a homelessness plan. It's over 10 years. It's got 200 different things you need to do, and you would set a budget and try and execute the plan and look back in 2 years or 10 years and see if it worked. One of the things we've realized, I think, is that there's no plan, there's no approach where I can give me a 417 item checklist. If you do those 417 items in the right order, you're going to end homelessness. What we've realized is that homelessness is dynamic, right? You need to have a coordinated local homelessness response that has clear leadership, that is using data, that has a plan, that has clear coordination. And then you need to use data-driven continuous improvement, right? To continually test and change and iterate toward ending homelessness. And so that's what we're testing with the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund. We're basically saying to communities, if you have real-time person-specific data, if you have by name data on homelessness in your communities, you're reaching home community, or you're part of Build for Zero, you can apply for one-time funding to test a change that will that will reduce homelessness in your community. So you look at your real-time data and you say, if I tried a diversion program, I could reduce inflow into my shelters by 50 people, which would be a 20% reduction in overall homelessness, right? And what we're trying to show people is that ultimately it's not a straight line. It's relentless incrementalism and continuous data-driven continuous improvement. Ultimately, at a community level, that's what it takes to get there. And we're about to, I think I'll give you a bit of breaking news, but we'll likely be announcing the first round of successful projects at the conference.
That's really exciting.
And we've just done our second call for expressions of interest, and we will launch our third early in the new year. I'd encourage any community that's interested to check out our website, and you can find out more there. But really, it's just about testing data-driven continuous improvement approach to reducing homelessness, and I'm confident in 2 years, 3 years, we're going to see the results of all of these projects, and you're going to see 20, 30 communities that have achieved a population level reduction in homelessness.
That's incredible. To our listeners, you heard it here. Apply to the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund.
Yeah, but you do that.
You have to be doing data-driven solutioning, though. It's like hearing you speak, there's definitely a very intentional focus, very intelligent and intentional on how we're actually going to reduce those numbers. We've seen examples like Medicine Hat and Guelph Wellington getting close. What do those communities have in common that others can learn from?
Well, it's really what I just said. I mean, you had strong local leadership. You had a clear leadership structure. You had a means of coordination. You had coordinated access. You used real-time data. You focused on housing, and you used data-driven continuous improvement. Those are the things that are really in common. And one of the things we're starting to lean more and more into is leadership. And one of the things you see, and I've looked at homeless systems all over the world, and one of the things that I know to be true about homelessness is wherever you've seen successful reductions, a successful approach to homelessness, you will always find really good, really strong, capable local leaders. And so we're doing some work with Art Code on, a leadership academy that if you Google Leadership Academy, Canadian Alliance and Art Code, you'll see that we have registration open for a leadership academy in the spring in Canmore, Alberta. But we're spending one of the things those communities have in common is really good leaders. And we're going to be investing much more in that leadership work as well.
Writing that down.
There you
That
go.
sounds really good because, you get so busy with the day-to-day work, I think. And, even the coordinated systems that we're trying to build and work through, I think, the opportunity you're sharing provides more, intentional work to get away from what you're doing and figure things out. Many communities, I would say, are struggling to maintain momentum, and you highlighted this amidst a worsening affordability crisis. Do you have any practical advice that you would offer to local leaders trying to balance housing first commitments with the realities of limited affordability and supply?
One of the things that I always tell municipal leaders and local leaders, just a couple of things. One is you may not have enough housing right now to end homelessness, but you have enough housing to begin, right? You have enough housing to move, you can't move everybody in, but you can move a bunch of people in. And one of the things that I find fascinating is actually we're pretty good at housing people. Like if we look at the communities we're working with, so the data we have just on those communities, we have a direct relationship with. Between 2018 and today, those communities have housed nearly 100,000 people.
Wow.
Right? They've housed nearly 100,000 people. The challenge is a lot more people became homeless than we were able to house. Right? So that says, your a smart dollar locally might be invested in keeping people in the homes they have, right? Thinking about prevention, thinking about diversion, thinking about how do we reduce and slow that inflow into homelessness. The other thing I say to local leaders is, what would you do if a fire or flood hit your community tomorrow afternoon? What would your response be? Right? The response to homelessness and a coordinated homeless system that's designed to end homelessness is actually almost exactly the same as disaster relief, right? Disaster response and relief. And if you look at the Calgary flood in 2013, 77,000 people were forced out of their homes. Fort McMurray in 2016, 83,000 people. Yellowknife, 25,000 people. The last fire in Jasper, thousands of people have been forced out of their homes. You know what? None of them are still homeless unless they were homeless before, right? So we end homelessness in Canada pretty regularly. And even if you look at the emergency response, what could a city do today to respond to unsheltered homelessness? Well, you would enhance outreach, housing focused outreach, and put in place bridge housing. Like get ACO trailers, get the kind of housing, there's 40,000 people living in work camps in Alberta right now. We do this all the time. You could put those kind of systems together, get people off the streets. There's some great examples of that with Niganan Housing Ventures in Edmonton or in Niagara. There's also some coming in Simcoe County. Some really good examples of how you use these COVID. We did it with COVID hotels, right? We can do it, right? It's just choosing to. There's lots you can do right now, even without the perfect alignment of resources.
I mean, how do you, I know I'm like, in terms of like how you framed it with the crisis, how do you think that fits in like those immediate solutions that you might apply during crisis versus long-term solutions of housing, like permanent
Well,
housing with supports for more extreme cases, but actual permanent.
Well, but again, if you look at a disaster response, the disaster response and recovery system is really focused on responding to the emergency and rebuilding. They're rebuilding Jasper today. And everybody that was there before and is unhoused as a result is living somewhere inside right now. Right? And so it's the same approach. Is the challenge with the homelessness response is we stop when we get people into shelter. Right? Like we all these people become homeless, lose their homes due to poverty and policy, and we build a shelter for them.
Right.
But when my parents were evacuated from the fire in Kelowna in 2003, I think it was 2003, 2006, somewhere in there, they were put up in a hotel for a week. And when it was safe to go back, the folks in the system worked out how to repair their home and get them back in. Right? The whole system recovery is focused on getting people back into homes. Right? And yesterday, I was driving in downtown Calgary and I drove by some of the preventative measures we're putting in place from the flood in 2013. They're putting in berms all the way down the river through downtown Calgary to prevent that kind of thing from happening again. Prevention is a big piece of it as well, and it takes time. But you can build a housing system in Canada, and like you can build those berms to hold the river back. We can build a housing system that keeps people from losing housing. We can build a housing safety net if we choose to.
You often remind us that behind every data point is a person. Can you share a story that stayed with you, one that captures both the urgency and the hope of this work?
Yeah, I got a million of them. But I
Sure.
think I go back to so before I led the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, I led the Calgary Homeless Foundation, and I was brought into the Homeless Foundation to build the plan to end homelessness in 2007. And we were launching Housing First for the first time in Canada. And we launched a new Housing First program. And I remember there was this young woman who was, I'll keep her name out of it at the moment, but this young woman who was brought into the program. And she had led such a hard life, chronically homeless, dealing with super complex needs and a lifetime of trauma and addiction and when she was entered into Pathways to Housing into this program, she was given a medical, as everyone was, and discovered she was pregnant. Her daughter, sorry, her daughter was born. Her daughter was actually born at around the same time that mine was. And our daughters, I've watched her on Facebook, kind of growing up, at the same rate. And I marvel at her mom, who's just been such a strong, incredible mom and great person. And this lovely daughter who, I once put her photo and my daughter's photo together and challenged people to tell the difference between the two. Right. And, one's mom was living under a bridge and another's mom was living in suburbia, with a family. Right. And who's to tell the difference? And that to me is, I remember thinking very clearly, I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, this Housing First thing or the plan to end homelessness, but, I know that those two are safe and that's enough for me. Right.
Looking ahead, what's next for CAEH and for the movement to end homelessness in Canada?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think for us, for the Alliance, it's, what I said a bit earlier, is leaning into how do we respond more quickly to what communities need today? How do we sharpen our pencils on getting better at giving communities and agencies the support they need to make their jobs easier, make it easier for them to end homelessness, lift some of that burden off of them wherever we can, and meet the challenge of a looming recession and craziness from the Orange Menace south of the border. We have to deal with the upset that's gonna all gonna cause, deal with the challenge in front of us, which is surging homelessness. I think we need to be driving really hard at making sure that the federal and provincial efforts to resolve the housing crisis are effective, because ultimately that's what's going to stop the flow into homelessness, and then give communities the tools they need to achieve reduction through the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund, and prove to Canadians that it's possible, and at scale. And that's my hope. And so I think, maybe we'll chat in a couple of years, and in a couple of years we'll see if I'm right or not. But I think, in a couple of years we're going to start to see that trajectory of homelessness begin to bend, like to begin to see the numbers start to reverse, and that'll be down to the work of the folks you'll meet at the conference at the end of the month.
And before we close in a minute, can you just refresh us on where we can sign up for the conference? What should we do? How long do we have?
Well, I wouldn't wait too much longer. We've sold out pretty much all of our hotels. There's still hotels in Montreal, but very few left at the conference. If you go to conference.caeh.ca, or just go to our website, caeh.ca, you'll find a link to the conference there, and you can register. Registration will be open for another couple of weeks. If you can't, for whatever reason, make it in person, there is a streaming option, so you can get the Netflix version of the 2025 National Conference on Ending Homelessness.
How very exciting. And finally, before you go, if we were to sit down 5 years from now, what headline would you love to see about Canada's progress?
I think in 5 years, people are going to be talking about homelessness in Canada like they're talking about homelessness in Finland. We won't be as far ahead. 5 years? I don't think we'll be as far as Finland is, but they're going to be talking about, I think they could be talking about homelessness in Canada in the same way. It's like, how did they do that? How did they turn around homelessness like that? I think the news stories in 5 years are going to be about how cities around the country addressed unsheltered homelessness, how communities around the country reduce the number of people in shelters. In fact, the news story might be the fact that there's no news stories on it. Right.
And if you feel we are going to be there that quickly, can you give us a high level what we will have done in those 5 years to achieve that?
Yeah.
You are giving me so much hope right now, Tim.
Well, I hope so. Well, I don't, Finland took over a decade to get where they're at.
Yeah.
So we're going to take some time, but in 5 years, I think we're going to see that we're bending the curve, and the numbers are going in the right direction. But the things we'll need to have done by then, I think you will have seen the housing crisis alleviated. You'll start seeing in 5 years, rental housing market that's much more close to balanced, right? Where the vacancy rates are higher, the rents are back down to something lower than what they are today. You're going to see a lot of, hopefully, thousands of units of supportive housing in place, housing first programs around the country, alignment between the provinces and the feds. You're going to see you mentioned Medicine Hat. We're going to be talking about Medicine Hat. We're going to be talking about Barrie. We're going to be talking about Halifax. We're going to be talking about Winnipeg. We're going to be talking about Kelowna, places where those cities and others like them will have changed the course because they built these really smart, effective, coordinated homeless systems, and they've started to achieve visible, meaningful reductions.
I want to add York Region to that list too.
York Region, for sure. Why not? You can do it.
Yeah.
You can do it. We can help. We've stolen Home Depot's motto.
Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us on the show today.
You bet.
Appreciate it. And I'm going to let
Yeah.
you go because you have so much to do right now.
Right
Thank
on.
you.
Well, thank you very much. It was great seeing you again.
Take care. Special thanks to Tim for joining us on the show today. Very grateful for everything the CAEH team does to lead, convene, and inspire across Canada. For our listeners, you can learn more about the CAEH conference at caeh.ca. And as always, thank you for tuning in to On the Way Home, where Blue Door keeps the conversation going about what it really takes to make sure everyone has a place to call home.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.